In this Bible story from the book of Job, there's a wealthy man named Job residing in an area called Uz with an extended family and vast flocks. He is blameless and upright, always striving to live a moral life. He had a very disciplined relationship with God. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the peoples of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. God extols Job's virtues to Satan, but Satan counters that Job is only righteous because God has lavished him with favor. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land." Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. Satan dares God that, if given the approval to inflict suffering, Job will change and curse God. God allows Satan to torment Job in order to test this bold claim, yet he stops Satan from taking Job's life. "But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face," the Lord said to Satan. "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Job chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. Job receives 4 reports in one day, each notifying him that his sheep, servants, and 10 children have all died as a result of thieving invaders or natural disasters. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans have formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Job chapter 1, verses 13 through 19. In his grief, Job tears his garments and shaves his head, but he still praises God in his prayers. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job chapter 1, verses 20 through 22. Satan arrives in heaven again, and God allows him another opportunity to test Job. Job is suffering from horrible skin rashes this time. Job's wife tries to persuade him to denounce God and give up and die, but he resists and tries to bear his sufferings. 2 plots are expertly intertwined, a heavenly plot and an earthly one. The occurrences on earth are the result of something that has already occurred in heaven, just as there is war on earth immediately following a conflict in heaven in the book of Revelation. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, 3 of Job's friends, arrive to console him, sitting with him in silence for 7 days in honor of his grief. Job speaks on the 7th day, starting off a dialogue in which each of the 4 men provide poetic descriptions of his problems. Job curses his birthday, comparing life and death to light and darkness. He wishes he had never been born and that his birth had been veiled by darkness, feeling that life just adds to his agony. Eliphaz responds that Job, who has previously consoled others, now admits that he was never aware of their suffering. Eliphaz concludes that Job's pain must be due to some sin Job has acted, and he recommends Job to seek God's favor. Bildad and Zophar agree that Job must have performed evil to provoke God's justice and argue that he should attempt to manifest more innocent behavior. Bildad supposes that Job's children brought their deaths upon themselves. Worse, Zophar implies that whatever mistake Job has committed has earned him far greater pain than he has received. Job reacts to each of these remarks, becoming so angry that he calls his sympathizers worthless physicians who paint their help with lies. Job chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. My ears have heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. He wonders why God evaluates people based on their actions when God can easily amend or pardon their actions. Job is perplexed as to how a human being may fully satisfy God's justice, given that God's ways are mysterious and beyond human comprehension. Furthermore, humans cannot possibly convince God with their words. God is not fooled, and Job admits that he doesn't even know himself well enough to defend his case before God. Job yearns for someone who can mediate between him and God, lest he be condemned to Sheol, the underworld. Job believes that in heaven there is a witness or redeemer who will attest to his integrity. Job chapter 19, verse 25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Job chapter 16, verse 19. Even now my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high. The suffering shows too much for Job, and he turns bitter, anxious, and scared. He deplores the injustice that God lets evil people thrive while he and many other honest people suffer. Job wants to face God and protest, but cannot physically find God. He thinks that wisdom is hidden from mankind, but he resolves to pursue it by fearing God and avoiding evil. Eventually, God steps in. The Divine Dialogue. Round 1. The Creator. During his speeches, 36 times Job asked God to speak with him. He has now received his wish. Both times when God speaks to Job, it occurs in the midst of a storm. There is such humor in the way that God addresses him. Job is reminded by God that he is the creator of everything. He runs through his awesome activity of creating and sustaining the world, asking Job whether he could match this work. He finishes by asking whether Job is in a position to judge, telling him that it is impertinent for Job to believe that God should explain himself to him. Job is made to feel very small. Eventually, Job replies, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. Round 2. Creatures. In the second round, God doesn't talk about himself as creator, but about 2 of his creatures. The discourse is full of humor once more. He asks Job for his thoughts on the hippopotamus, the behemoth, and the crocodile, Leviathan, as though these amazing beasts hold the answers to life's big issues. Job is being reminded that he can't understand God. He can't understand the animal world, never mind the moral world. So God's main point is, why are you attempting to dispute with me? Job responds that God is all-knowing and that no plan of his can be foiled. He now realizes that his questioning of God was totally inappropriate, and he despises himself and repents in dust and ashes. Although the encounter with God is humiliating for Job, the heart of his problem is dealt with, for he is back in touch with God again. The dialogue provides a magnificent, if unexpected, climax to the book. The epilogue. The text shifts from poetry to prose as Job accepts that he should not blame God for his dealings with him. Job's children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, property and camels and sheep flocks are returned to him by God, and he becomes far wealthier and happier than he was before. As God's servant, he is vindicated. Job's 3 friends, on the other hand, are severely chastised by God. He says they have not spoken accurately about Job, which tells us that we shouldn't quote their speeches as if they were truth. The remarkable thing about God's 2 rounds with Job is that he still doesn't answer Job's inquiries, and he doesn't tell Job about his wager with Satan. Job didn't need to know what was going on in heaven because God had his reasons for permitting him to suffer. We must bear in mind one acute difference between a Jewish understanding of this book and a Christian one. The Jew of the Old Testament times was unable to see the problems of temporal life in the light of eternity. He felt that the justice of God must be seen in this life, since both good and bad people went to the same destination, Sheol, the place of shadowy existence where departed spirits slept. Christians, on the other hand, have a completely different viewpoint on current suffering. They view the greater vision of heaven in light of Christ's work. Suffering in this world pales in comparison to the life that awaits us in heaven. As a result, there are only hints of life after death throughout the book of Job. Job declares at one point that he will meet God after he dies, but this is not a recurring topic in the book, and he has no idea how this will happen. The book of Job has 2 plots. The divine plot. The book begins with the heavenly plot, God's meeting in heaven with Satan. Satan was an angel whose job was to report sins. He was God's counsel for the prosecution who traveled across the earth to report to God what human beings were like. By the time of Job, Satan had become so cynical that he couldn't believe anyone could love God for the sake of God. He believed that people only loved God for what he could provide them. So there is a debate between God and Satan, with Satan arguing this very point. God asks Satan whether he met Job when he visited the earth. Job loves him because he loves him, not because of any blessing he has received, God claims. Satan's response is cynical, arguing that if God were to take away Job's blessings, he would blaspheme God just like everyone else. As a result, the divine wager takes place. Tension is essential in any excellent drama. Job is unaware of the divine wager while the reader is. The test would be worthless if he knew. This encounter teaches us valuable truths about Satan. For starters, it suggests that he cannot be in 2 places at the same time. He is not endowed with God's omnipresence. The human plot. The dispute between Job and his companions takes up the most of the book. Why is Job suffering more than other people, is the central question addressed. There are 2 points of view. A, the friends are certain that Job's suffering is due to his sin. B, Job is certain that he is not sinning and protests his innocence. The exchange is filled with suspense because the reader knows Job is accurate. The book's 2-plot structure reminds us that no one knows the complete picture when it comes to figuring out why people suffer. It must be tough to defend yourself when you are in such misery. Beyond the search for explanations, everyone is confronted with a larger question. Can I continue to believe in a good God when everything seems to be going wrong? The book of Job gives an answer to this question. What was Job's greatest pain? Clarifies the significance of this topic. Was it a physical confrontation? Was he covered in sores from head to toe, tired and exhausted, and in excruciating pain? Social? Because of his physical appearance and the fact that the local community was aware of his recent tragedy, he became a social outcast. People walked on the other side of the street rather than converse to him since he sat on the ash heap at the village's end. Even the teenagers laughed at him. Mental? He faced the mental pain of not knowing why these distressing things were happening to him, especially as there seemed to be nothing in his past to point to. Spiritual? His spiritual anguish was far worse than any other, as he felt cut off from God. He yelled out, pleading with him to locate him, speak with him, and even argue with him. This was the true, most excruciating ache. Suffering is much more agonizing if we believe God is far away and unconcerned. However, when Job was finally able to talk with God, things didn't go as planned. For Christians, the book of Job can be seen in the context of the New Testament. 1. God allowed Satan to bring about Jesus' death on the cross, with his own son asking the question, "My God, why?" As with Job, God didn't explain why. This argues that even the Son of God lost contact with the purpose for his suffering under the intensity of the crucifixion's torment. 2. The Christian understands that life continues beyond death. The problems of suffering do not have to be resolved in this life. It is interesting to note that in the Greek version of the book of Job, an extra verse has been added. and it is written that he, Job, will rise again with those whom the Lord raises up. 3. This hope of resurrection reminds us that there will be a final vindication of Job. Christians believe that Jesus will return to judge the living and the dead at the end of time. One day there will be a courtroom scene in which Jesus will sit as judge, and all the evil and pious people who have ever lived will stand before his throne to be judged according to their actions in the body. So everything Job wished for is about to become a reality. God's righteousness will be applied to the entire human race in a public vindication of justice.